Welcome to Being Human. My name's Steve Cuss. Glad to be your host today. A lot of what we do on this show is we interview guests. We have an amazing guest today. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview. And it brought to mind something I learned from a preacher and a Bible scholar named Dr. Fred Craddock. I'll probably talk more about him in the future. He's one of my great heroes of the faith. He got his doctorate in Luke, as you do. And so he's written commentaries on Luke and also the book of Acts written by Luke. And I'll just never forget what Fred Craddock said about the prodigal son story. He was talking about the literary structure of that story. And, after the prodigal, for those of you familiar with the story, the prodigal comes home, the dad throws a party, has to go find the older brother and convince him to come in and celebrate. And the older brother's complaining, that the party's being thrown for this wayward brother. And the father says to the brother, he says, "This brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so there's kind of a little literary poetic structure there. Your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. And Fred Craddock, the preacher hero of mine, the Bible scholar, he says that this is a common technique in Hebrew stories. It's called the end stress emphasis. The last thing said is the most important. Lost and found. And Craddock just made this wonderful little thought that I want to share with you. He says, it turns out there's something worse than being dead, and that's being lost. There's something better than just being alive, and that's being found. The reason I share that today is it becomes a theme with my guest. But also, before I introduce my guest, I just want to light the candle and just invite you to take stock of where are you at right now? Are you barely staying alive, like your head is barely above water? You feel like it's all crashing in on you. Or it's common with Christians, we are afraid of being lost, I think. I think one of the challenges today is we use lost pejoratively, like we describe non-Christians or unchurched people as they're lost people, as if we as Christians don't lose our way once in a while as well. And I guess you could almost say, thank God we do lose our way once in a while, for however else are we going to encounter the grace of God. So today I just light the candle to recognize God's presence. All right. I just light the candle to recognize God's presence, but also I light this just for those of you who are feeling lost. You've lost your way. Or maybe you feel like you've lost sight of God, which is very common. That's a normal experience for followers of Jesus. We go through these seasons where we've lost sight of God. Sometimes we feel like God has lost sight of us. And we light a candle today just by faith that God is with us and that we can be found, we are being found, we have been found, just to relax into God's presence today. All right, folks, my guest is Steve Carter. Man, I love this guy. I love Steve. I've had the opportunity to spend some time with him. He was a guest on my old podcast, Managing Leadership Anxiety. This week, he's releasing a stunning book, Grieve, Breathe, Receive. His journey at Willow Creek, his journey of loss, very personally in his family, and then, of course, the amazing journey of being found. I started the interview just by asking Steve about his 38th birthday, where this journey kind of began for him, what was going on and what was said to him. Let's tune in now.
Every Wednesday, a couple of us would gather for a little breakfast. It was a time to just kind of share what was really going on in our life. And a buddy of mine had kind of been with a mentor of his, and he was saying and sharing a little bit about just the last few years have been really, really hard. And the mentor said, well, that's because you're kind of moving from the first half of life to second half of life. And, those years between 38 and turning 43, those are really difficult years. I mean, your body changes. You're not as far as you thought you would be financially, professionally, your identity, your ego. You typically have a parent that dies. Those 5 years are some of the hardest years, if not the most difficult years of a man's life. And that coming weekend, I was turning 38. And that coming weekend, it was going to be announced that I was going to be one of the 2 successors at Willow Creek Community Church outside of Chicago, and kind of succeed Bill Hybels. And I just remember like looking at my friend going, dude, I'm about to turn 38. Don't speak that voodoo over me, you know? And a few nights, maybe like after that, it was maybe the Friday or to the Saturday, I kind of woke up in a little bit of like anxious panic. And the only way I knew how to solve it was like, well, just do the math. So I was like 365 times 5, add 1 day for leap year. That's 1,826 days. Like what could go bad in 1,826 days? And I will tell you, it was announced that I got the role and it was my dream job, and it started out fantastic. And by the time I was 39, I had resigned from that role, just due to some allegations that had come out about my mentor, and just wanted to stand with the women and do what I thought was the best thing for the church, but also for my integrity. And so it just kind of led to a few years of trying to figure out, what do you do when life does what it does?
Yeah, I think about your friend that said that to you on your birthday. My first thought is, dude, you don't just know how to sing happy birthday to a guy? Like, that's first. You guys still good friends, or do you keep him at a distance now?
Yeah, no, we are. It's, he has been someone who we have really tried to stay in the conversation, to stay, what we call it is like staying in the hand. We will be lifelong friends. But it was tricky because a lot of the relationships became collateral damage due to the events that happened at Willow. And this one was a relationship that really, really means something to me, and I know means something to him, but there is a lot of complexity around it. And I will say, to his credit, he has done a very great job continuing to welcome me to his table, and I have hopefully been able to return the favor to him.
For listeners and watchers that want to dig into the Willow story, I'll simply say, Steve, you were on my show a few years ago and we got right into it. I'm going to encourage people who want to, they can read your book. You, I think, actually very tastefully and respectfully get into what actually happened in the book. They can also listen to you on my podcast, others. I just say that to kind of move us through. Like if people are like, oh, I want to know. I'm not avoiding it. I'm just saying you and I have covered it. You've covered it in the book. You've covered it on other interviews in many places. Here's what I'm interested in for the sake of this conversation. Things are rolling out at Willow. You and Sarah are really struggling and trying to discern, what do we do? Do we stay? Should we leave? What's the right thing to do? In these situations, people will say, oh, the will of God is doing the next right thing. And here you are trying to agonize your way to the right thing. How did you know to do what you ended up deciding to do, which was resign and step away?
Yeah, I think for me, there's something called the cadet's prayer. And my biological grandfather was like a multi-star general. He's actually buried at West Point. And I got really, really fascinated when I learned about the cadet's prayer like a decade plus ago. And it just became like a prayer I would regularly say, journal about. But some of the lines were, may we be more committed to the harder right than the lesser wrong. May we live above the common level of life. I mean, this is from the early 1900s. Anybody who went to West Point had to memorize this full prayer. And it is, I mean, the language of it is rich and deep for, I think, 3 of the 4 paragraphs. They're just stunning. And never tell a half truth when the full truth can be one. Like, it's just like, and I think you put that on top of having a mentor who constantly asked me when I was in high school and I was in junior high, did you have integrity today? And he'd say to me, Steve, I don't care how many points you score. I don't care where you go to college. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care. All I care about is, did you mean what you say and say what you mean? And did you have integrity today? And that question I often would write off when he said that to me when I was younger. But as I got older, I began to recognize, like, oh my goodness, this is what it's all about. You add then being a pastor, and then you become a father. And as a father, I felt like one of the things I would ask my son, Emerson, who is now about to turn 16 from an early age, did you have an integrity today? And as he started to learn how to talk 3, 4, he'd look back at me and go, Dad, did you have integrity today? And we would that's how we would end our night every night when I put him to bed. And so this question started to haunt me when I began to realize, I think that we're choosing self-preservation as an organization rather than actually standing with the people who are actual victims. And the deeper issue underneath it was, we're playing with people's trust. And I didn't sign up to be a pastor to play with people's trust. And so I think I just got to a point where I am now moving into a place of complicity if I pretend or I minimize or I don't use what I've been entrusted with to actually get to what the cadets prayer would call the harder right. And it's not what I'd wish on anyone. It was painful. Like I still feel like it's a bad dream that I'm going to wake up from someday. But I think at the end of the day, I hope that the messages that I preach, that I actually can embody them. And this just felt like one I needed to embody and not just talk about.
Yeah, it really came to a point where you were scheduled to preach and some more information had come out in the week and you were asked or told to kind of preach as if nothing new has happened this week. And that became for you the pinch point. You were famously sickened backstage, trying to manage it. What I find fascinating is that kind of helped you clarify the next right thing and the integrity move. Were you surprised by the backlash? Like when you try to do the right thing, it's really hard to then receive backlash from people. You got quite a bit of backlash for that decision.
Yeah, well, so just one little context thing. Annie F. Downs was actually preaching, and I was doing an interview with Ira Glass from This American Life, who isn't a believer. So Annie's doing a sermon, and I saw it on Saturday night because we had Saturday night service. She taught on being brave. It was a fantastic message. I interview Ira Glass just about storytelling, his curiosity around faith, but not there yet. And it was amazing. And then these stories come out and I'm like, hey, this is the New York Times who's saying this story. We call it a meeting and I'm like, we gotta talk about this. No, we can't talk about it. We can't just go play church. We have to. And all of a sudden I could just feel like my body in full. And I just said, I got to use the restroom. And I threw up. I threw up in Bill's back office bathroom. And I'm washing my face and I look at the mirror and I think of Hal, my mentor, going, Steve, did you have integrity today? And I also think about my son looking at me and asking me tonight, did you have integrity today? And I thought to myself, if I go on that stage, I'm playing with people's trust. I'm not representing what I believe the truth of the gospel is to Ira Glass and to the victims. And this woman who's just told her story to the New York Times and was so vulnerable. And we're going to be like, it's not that big of a deal. I couldn't, man. And so I leave, I resign through a blog post, and there's a whole reason why I did it that way. But honestly, man, I thought I was done. I was going to be the guy who didn't show up to church. Like, no one's going to trust this guy. And I think what hit me, and it really, really surprised me, was people outside the Willow context were thankful that I actually did what I did. And people within the Willow context or that sphere felt like I abandoned and betrayed them. And I thought I was going to get more. I thought it was going to be opposite. I thought the outside world wouldn't know me, didn't understand why I did what I did, and they were going to shoot the shots. And the people who knew me were going to know what I did and try to get me back, if I'm really, really honest. And it didn't happen. And I think what happened was my exit made people realize there was more going on. And I think that confronted some massive cognitive dissonance that I think for a lot of people weren't ready to explore.
Yeah, and you're also kind of describing the way a system works, I think, Steve. Like when you're in a system, it's so hard to see. When you're outside the system, it's so clear. And I don't know if it's a frog in a boiler situation, but do you have a thought on what's going on there? Why is it so hard to see when you're caught up in it?
I mean, I think at that time, there was a lot of good. And I think sometimes you start doing the math and you start thinking, no, like it's 90% good or it's 80% good, like. And then I think sometimes the gravitational pull to an institution, to a leader, can blind you. I also think that everyone has to count the costs. I mean, I never spoke to more people in a room than when I did. I never made as much money as I did. I never had like whatever influence would be. I mean, I'm a kid from Camarillo, California. Like I got plucked out of a small church at a campus in Fullerton, California, to come be a teaching pastor at Willow Creek. Like I saw the next 25 years of my life. I was helping out, doing stuff with the Bears, Bible studies. I was teaching. I loved my life, man. So I think all of a sudden you get put in this situation. Your kids are settled. You're settled in a neighborhood. You're settled in a role. You're settled in a community. And I was hook, line, and sinker in the vision of that space. Dr. B was Bill's mentor. Bill was my mentor. And someday I was going to be a Dr. B for somebody else. I saw it, man. And I think sometimes it's just, many of us just don't want to be unsettled for what we believe is right, or we don't want to see because of what it would cost. And I understand that because I felt that for a couple months, to be honest.
Yeah. So you resigned, and as you said, you resigned publicly, but in the book you explain exactly why it was that way. People can check that out. Resignation has financial implications. You're over the barrel for a book that you don't want to write. But the other thing, it wasn't just your financial future, your family's well-being. You start noticing as you stay in the neighborhood, you're taking your son out for coffee. Willow members are very comfortably coming up to you in front of your son and accosting you. Your name became a verb. And so your reputation, now it's out of your hands. You can't manage your reputation. For someone with your kind of wiring, Steve, that's got to drive you absolutely crazy.
That's hard, man. That's hard. I mean, even just you bringing that stuff up, it's still really tender, you know? Yeah, people supposedly would say if someone got up and left a meeting, don't Carter me. And I heard that. And that was hard because you could almost fantasize who was the person who said it. Why would they say that? And you couldn't shut your brain down. I'm holding my son's hand at Starbucks and someone comes up and starts, you betrayed us. You're not a leader. You abandoned us. You're a coward. And my son's looking at them and then looking at me. And I'll just never forget. He just said, Dad, you always told me if you do the right thing, you get rewarded. So you either didn't do the right thing or you lied to me because that didn't feel like a reward. And I think all of what I started to realize was, gosh, there was a lot of shadows within me, like ways that if people thought highly of me, I almost got a little juice from that. If I could be Ferris Bueller to everyone, I got a little bit of juice from that. If I could be the person who connected someone to another person, I could get a little juice from that. I just got these bumps of energy, and then all of a sudden, you don't have that. You don't have it from teaching. You don't have it from leading. You don't have it from being on a team. And you don't really want to go outside. And then you look in the mirror and you don't even recognize yourself because it's just the weight of it. And then you feel frustrated because these innocent people don't know the whole story. And it's all like within you, and not knowing how to process it was hard. It was really hard.
I find it fascinating when one of their highest values is then wielded against them. This is an interesting transition thing. Like the first time I met you, Steve, I was actually with you and several of your friends, several deep friendships. And I came away, we spent a week together in an international context, which is a great way to get to know someone whenever, all the comforts are stripped away.
Well, can we be really honest?
I came away.
We were on a bus for a long, I think like a 2.5 hour drive, and you walked and I'm like sitting by myself looking out a window, and you just sit down and you're like, can we talk about it? And I was like, who is this guy with the amazing accent? And you just were so safe, and you just, like you do, just somehow opened this moment. And I shared, for 2 hours, I think, with you, and you were just, it was pastoral, therapeutic, healthy. It was so kind. So sorry. I just wanted the context of you just initiating and being who you are was such a gift for me.
I don't remember, since you opened that up, I will just share, I don't remember if I read it in the New York Times, but I read it somewhere that you were throwing up backstage. And I remember thinking, if I ever meet this poor fellow, I remember praying for you in that moment and then thinking, if I ever meet this poor fellow, I would just like to be a source of relief in his life. Like, it just sounds like, so it was an intentional move, I'm going to just see if he would like some relief, because that's awful. But what I was thinking is I walked away from our time together thinking to myself, I bet Steve Carter values loyalty to his friends and relationships as one of his highest values. You and I've never openly talked about that, but is that accurate to you? You're like, I am loyal to my friends and my people.
Yeah. A 3 on the Enneagram in healthy integration goes to a 6, and loyalty is, it's really important to me. And to be,
so therefore,
feeling disloyal.
Therefore, being seen as disloyal, where you cannot convince, like one more meeting is not going to convince them. That's painful. That's hard.
It's hard. It is, and then when you want to communicate or you want to write or you want to help, and you can't, it led to a lot of soul searching for me, why do I need them to see me in this way? Why do I need their approval? And you're not going to get it. And maybe in time, you will, but right now, this can't be what you're focusing on.
So you and Sarah move to the desert, literally and metaphorically. You take it as a spiritual pilgrimage. You go into Arizona, surround some of Sarah's family, and you're just trying to take stock. And, people might say, oh, Steve Carter, that's the former Willow guy. And that's what they know. But then in the book, you start to open up about your adoptive dad, your search for your birth father, the losses. Your book is fundamentally on grief and recovery, or moving through grief. And so you let us in on some very personal grief. Before we get into whatever you want to say about that part of your life, Steve, what that strikes in me is the tendency for Christians to read these stories, like Willow was a world-famous story, and forget that the people involved are human beings. I'd love to get your take on that. Like, how can we do better at, like some of these things have to be exposed, I believe. There's things happening in darkness that I believe God wants us to bring to the light. So I believe there are some people that their ministry, they really say, my ministry is bringing these things to the light, and they're publishing things. I understand that. But I'm also seeing a disturbing trend of forgetting that the people involved are human beings. So like in your case, you're going through deep loss, family loss. You're going through your own quest to make sense of adoption. Like there's a lot there. What's your take on our tendency to forget that everyone's human in this?
It's a great question, man, because I relate with you. I think that there are stories that need to be told. There are truths that need to be exposed. And there's ways that we probably all have on a spectrum our comfortability to the tone, the spirit, the how. I think what's tricky is in my unique situation, like my spiritual father in so many ways was gone. Like, so I think what ends up happening is then it drops to the next person. And we can't get to this one, so we go to this one. And it starts. And I think so much of the collateral damage that comes out where people are trying to figure out motivation and intention and who was complicit, who did. If the person who actually committed the offense stands up and says, a lot would have been prevented. But unfortunately, the natural tendency is for the person in power and the people around them is to preserve, which only feeds the advocates of the victims or the truth seekers or the wounded resistors to be like, I smell smoke, and where there's smoke, there's got to be a fire. And I just think I wished in situations if people just went first and said, here's what happened. Here's what happened. And when you don't do that and you manage, which is a human experience, to try and minimize, to manage, to cover up, to preserve, it just falls on more people to have to then bear that pain and attack and collateral damage. And that's hard. It's really, really hard. And from the outside, I understand it, but doesn't mean I like it. It just is.
Yeah. In the season where you're in the desert, you're kind of scrambling to financially provide for your family. You're off the books. You're not on a payroll. You don't have an organization. You're totally freelancing. You did an amazing job of making sure that you were on a healing journey. One of the stories I loved from your book, Steve, is you went to Camino in Spain and you got completely lost. Like you went with a group, but you ended up on the wrong path. You needed help from a local. Just tell us about that and tell us about what you learned about getting lost.
Yeah. Well, the Camino is the Camino de Santiago is this amazing trail and trek and pilgrimage where it follows the way of St. James, who brought the gospel to Spain. And so, hundreds of thousands of people do it. And I think pilgrimage is a lost art in our culture in the US. And so I didn't really know what I was signing up for, but every day you would just kind of get your backpack on and walk a few miles, sit at a little cafe, walk a few miles. And all you were doing is literally following these yellow arrows. I have like a bracelet, these yellow arrows and shells. And that's how you knew you were on the right path. So it was great. Cell phone reception was terrible, but you had the yellow arrow, you had the yellow shell, and it was awesome. And I'm just walking one day, and some days you just get lost in just the melodic of right foot, left foot, right foot, left foot. You're processing, and it's amazing just how walking stuff just comes up. And I missed a turn. And I just was walking, and I found myself like on a highway overpass, and a lady stops, and you could tell, she's like, "Are you looking for the Camino?" I'm like, "Yeah." And she tells me how to do it. And at the end of that night, every night we would get together with the group, because we'd all walk sometimes together, sometimes separate. It was, you Camino the way that you need to Camino for the day. And I remember sharing this story, and my buddy John Huckins just said, just something that really, really stuck with me, because I was saying how much I hate being lost. And it felt like it was like describing my time in the desert. I just feel lost. And he just said, well, if you never get lost, you can never be found. And all of a sudden it like dawned on me, like, why am I preventing myself from being found? Like, why do I work so hard to preserve and not feel lost? And I'm actually working against the heart of the Father and the way, or the buen camino, the good way of Christ, who wants to remind me that it's okay to get lost, because you can be found. You can be found.
In my work, one of my favorite tools is called a verbatim, and not many people know about it. You write an essay of a leadership encounter that didn't go well. You present it to a group of peers. One of me or one of my people are facilitating. One of the things I love about it, Steve, is oftentimes I'll put peer groups together that have never done this before, and then they immediately become the body of Christ for each other. And it's like, it feels like I'm on holy ground. I must have facilitated hundreds of verbatims now. And I'll never forget, this pastor was under all of this pressure, this internal pressure of what kind of pastor he should be, this external pressure, his dad, uncle, grandfather, all pastors, the person he succeeded, he's got them all on his shoulders, trying to be a bit of all of them. And the poor guy was drowning. And in the theme of his essay and verbatim was, I'm drowning. And me as the experienced facilitator and all his peers, we're all trying to save him. And one guy, one of the peers, just looks at him and says, why don't you just go ahead and die? Like, if you're drowning, why are we so anxiously trying to save you? Just drown. And let's put to death Pastor 1.0, because God's a God of resurrection. I was like, oh my goodness, this is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes.
What's your reaction to that? I love that story.
Oh, I think that's so beautiful. I know that some listeners might be hearing that being like, oh my gosh, it's so scary, but metaphorically, but spiritually, you sit there and you go, gosh, that's at the heart of Friday, Saturday, Sunday,
Yeah.
You don't get resurrection if something's still alive. And I think sometimes we're trying to hold on to and preserve and protect some of the stuff that, it's like, what was it when the women go to the tomb and what does the angel say? Like, why are you looking for the dead among the living? So like, just as you said that, it's like, I feel like we constantly trying to hold to tradition or preserve. And it's like, what's the new thing that God is stirring and that the Spirit has for us today? What's the new song, the new chapter, the next iteration that Christ wants to do in us and through us and for us and with us?
Yeah, in your book, I have not read a nonfiction in a long time that makes me cheer for the author so much as reading your book. Like I mean, it helps that I know you, I think, but if I didn't, I'd be like, I hope this guy makes it. Like it really, just the pile on of loss upon loss upon loss in that period. You wrote it in a way that leads us on a journey. I want to honor that it's better read than, I don't want to spoil it is what I'm saying, but you do link forgiveness and grief, and I thought that was fascinating. Tell us your understanding of the relationship between forgiveness and grief.
Yeah, I mean, when I started to think about these words, grieve, breathe, receive, they actually came to me the day after I resigned. I got up super early in the morning, went for a walk, and probably a handful of times I felt like God has like impressed some words, and this was one of them. And I went to a donut shop in Madison, Wisconsin, and I just started journaling, and I just wrote, grieve what is, grieve what I thought it was going to be, and grieve how key people let me down. The hardest two for me wasn't grieve what is. I mean, it's like, yeah, but grieve what I thought it was going to be. And then it was like, I have to grieve how key people let me down and actually prevented what I thought it was going to be from happening. And the more I sat with that, the more, oh my goodness, like it was like seeds that started to turn into anger fantasies. They turned into frustration. And sometimes I entertained that, I write about this in the book, and I had some versions of myself that I'm not proud of. But then once you start to look at it and you go, gosh, my definition for grief is just honor what comes up when change shows up. And I didn't know how to honor it. I knew how to stuff or manage or push away or pretend that it didn't happen. But I have to honor, those people hurt me. So now what am I going to do about that? And I realized the gift that God gave humanity in forgiveness is literally like right from the jump of Scripture, just to not have that level of toxicity or shame or disintegration happening within the body, but you have a chance to release it. And the two Greek words of aphemi and charismai kind of became anchor words for me. They're the way that they're defined when it comes to forgiveness in the ancient text, and kind of became this mantra for me that anytime one of those names would come to mind and I could feel myself, I realized I have a choice. And I would say this little prayer, cross, release, send it away. And if I didn't do that, that anger would turn into bitterness, would turn into resentment, would turn into anger, rage, frustration. But if I could start to let it go, I could begin to do the work so that if the people who ever hurt me started to do their work, maybe, just maybe, there might be a miracle or reconciliation could happen. But if I don't do my forgiveness work and they do their forgiveness work, reconciliation won't happen. And it takes more than one person for reconciliation, but forgiveness is a solo sport. And I had to learn that. And the desert was a great training ground for that.
All right, Steve. You have stood on the stage of Willow Creek Church. You have interned under Rob Bell in his prime. You have walked the dusty roads of Guatemala with Jimmy Miato, the president of Compassion International, while Henry Cloud was lingering in the background. However, you have not yet successfully endured the being human gauntlet. I think we all have people in our lives that just trigger us. They're just a behavior about them. What is a behavior in another person that's guaranteed to irritate or trigger you?
Ooh, that's good. I would say one of the easiest ones is they root for the wrong team, the Packers and Ohio State Buckeyes. So that's easy. But no, I think people who aren't courteous, it's a real frustration to me. Like when I think that people don't give the benefit of the doubt, or when people talk down to someone, when you're just asking a genuine question that you don't know, and they're like, that stuff just, I don't think we see the human curiosity. It's just move along. That really bothers me. At my worst over the years, that's when my passive aggressiveness would easily come out, so.
Okay. If you'd be so kind as to fill in the blank on this one. What if I were as blank to myself as God is?
The first word that came to my mind was persistent. Like, just never give up. Never give up on people. I want to be that kind of persistent. Have that level of persistency.
I like that answer. I've asked that question so many times. You're the first one to say that. I really like that answer. The next thing, I think this is a real gift to listeners when a pastor is willing to share this. I've asked this of all kinds of people, but Steve, where do you experience a gap between what you believe about God versus what you experience from God? So for me, up until 2016, God's love, I believed it, I struggled to encounter it. I could proclaim it to others. I believed it in my head, I didn't believe it in my body.
So I would say that God is trustworthy. And I think over the last few years, I've have this mathematical formula, safe plus consistent again and again, over and over on repeat, makes someone worthy of trust. Someone unsafe consistently, not worthy of trust. And someone safe, but quite inconsistent, not worthy of trust. And that God is safe, that God is consistent, and that God will receive my fullness and brokenness, that he's worthy of trust. It was probably like not until the desert that I actually believed that. It was more driven by performance than I could not have to bright side everything. I could bring everything to him.
Oh, this next one feels a bit left field, but I'm really provoked by it. Tell us about either the first time you encountered a dead body or the first time you experienced a colossal loss in your life. What was that like?
The first time I experienced a dead body, saw a dead body, was a senior in high school, freshman in college, somewhere like around that time. And the woman who had been our basketball scorekeeper and librarian, Mrs. Magali, had a brain aneurysm. And Mrs. Magali, like, she was a little like ornery, but she liked me and I liked her. And she just like, go score some points, like she just the way she talked. I just liked her. She was safe. And so she had a brain aneurysm and she got rushed to the hospital, and I went to go see her, and they let me go see her, and I sat beside her and I prayed for her. And I kind of snuck my way into this ICU area and just like sat bedside for 15 minutes and prayed. And they're beeping, making noise like the machines. And I drove back to the church, and I had told the church, like the office, hey, I been praying for Mrs. Magali. And they're like, oh, Steve, she died. I'm like, no, she didn't. I just was with her. And they're like, oh, they were just keeping her alive so she could donate her organs. I didn't know how to fathom that. That was like it was just weird. It was the cognitive dissonance in that moment was wild, because she was breathing, but she wasn't alive. So that was really, really, that messed me up for a bit.
Yeah. All right, the last two questions are more on the proactive side. I'm fascinated by environments where people feel so at home that they can be exactly themselves. There's no pretense. There's no need to perform. If you're a pastor, the pastor hat is off. Where have you felt home in the last month or so? Where has been a time or a person?
So my wife and I just celebrated 20 years. And I think when you go through something, you're constantly wondering like, can we trust each other? Can we be safe and consistent? And as much as the work that we had to do to process through Willow, we also had to do like in some holes in our marriage. And a lot of it came out of my ambition. And so to have this space to get to 20 and just really, really meaningful. And she's home for me for sure.
All right, last question. What's a habit or practice or a person that helps you relax into the presence of God?
Yeah, for a while I was doing the welcoming prayer from Mary Mordjowski and Father Thomas Keating in the mornings. That was really, really helpful. I think anytime that I can just get up and walk, I seem to connect. Something unlocks in me, in my prayer time, in just my soul. And then IFS has been really, really huge in my life, is being aware of the various parts. And the parts of me that feel powerless is usually when I'm most disintegrated, but learning to speak for and not speak from my parts has been really important to my own integration and health.
Friends, my guest is Steve Carter. His book, The Thing Beneath the Thing, came out a few years ago. Still one of the best and most helpful ways to access what's going on under the surface in your life. But his latest book just came out, Grieve, Breathe, Receive. The Friday, Saturday, Sunday of our faith. Loss, forgiveness, pain, but also joy and healing and freedom. It's a remarkable work. Steve, man, as always, thanks for coming on Being Human.
Thank you, man. Much love.